I want to first talk about 3 components of hitting an angle that are just absolute musts in my book. They are open stance, early contact point, and racket speed. Okay, 3 things that just really should be there. We're talking about the forehand right now. Let's get into open stance first. And what I want to do is first demonstrate an attempt at an angle here with my forehand with more of a step in to slightly closed position. Take a look at this. Okay, so really feeling that it's tricky when I'm trying to rotate my body towards my target, which is way out over there on the left, when I'm taking that left foot and stepping into the ball. It's much tougher on my hips and shoulders to make a great rotational move out of this type of stance. Now, if I just open up the stance and plant the right foot, I think it becomes very clear to you out there how much easier it is on my body to rotate heavily open, guiding that ball severely over there to the left. So take a look now with open stance. Okay, got my chest almost facing out here to the left. That's the sign of somebody who's hitting a really easy angle, is when the upper body can go from really coiled out here to the right to very open back to the left side. And to me, the step-in stance, while we could still pull off some angles, would probably be a little trickier racket work, but it's just not as easy on the body to execute angles out of that neutral or step-in position. So let's really work on getting that stance open. All right, then that brings us into the second point, which is contact point. All right, let's progress really quickly through a down-the-line forehand, a ball towards the middle, and then an angle forehand. Take a look at my contact point. You'll see these in slow motion. Okay, so there's down the line. Now, to get the ball a little more to the middle, I've got to let the racket meet the ball slightly farther in front of that down the line position. Okay, so and that's just timing. That's me feeling out the racket getting a little farther forward. So I think it makes sense that when I want my strings facing angle, that's as far out in front of me as I can hit. I'm sure a lot of you out there hear that phrase, hey, work the outside part of the ball. That's exactly what early contact is. I'm reaching as far as I ever would for contact, and it's putting my strings more on the right side of the tennis ball. Okay, so let's take a look at contact point on an angle. Look how far in front this is. Okay, so that is so key. I know it seems simple. Oh yeah, your string should be facing there, but it's really a timing idea where we've got to play the ball really far out in front of our body. That's how the strings are going to really easily line up cross court for this angle, rather than some of you out there who are playing the angle at the wrong contact point and then really trying to have to work to get the ball over there. We want these angles to come off the racket really easy. Contact point will allow that. Okay, and then the third idea is racket speed. And I think this is what kind of tricks a lot of you out there, because the target is what we would say is a small target. It's not like the middle of the court out there where I could miss the middle and still be in play. The angle's a small target where if I miss that spot, there's a good chance I'm maybe into the alley, or it's going to the guy because I didn't get it quite enough angle on it. So with the small target idea, a lot of players at the club level do this, which is kind of decelerate the racket or slow the racket down. And now all of a sudden it's pretty much a bad swing. We're stopping through contact, trying to steer the ball over there. So keep in mind, small target doesn't matter. We still want racket speed. We have to accelerate the racket through the ball so that we're striking it confidently. Take a look at my racket speed on an angle here. Okay, really trying to still hit the ball. So, very important ideas there. To hit great angles, you know, obviously I'm illustrating the forehand side here, but we want to be open stance. We want to have that really early contact point, and we want to keep that racket speed up. So what role does spin have when hitting angles? It's really just, we got to be thinking top spin is the only play. Okay, so watch. I'm going to drop hit a forehand angle here, and notice the strings and the ball are moving the same direction. Okay. All right, and it's really just, the idea should be extreme topspin. We want that ball dipping really nice and heavy as it makes its way over the top of the net. Compare that to a standard, you know, topspin forehand, maybe just cross court. Mark, go ahead and feed me one here. Okay, so like we know from the previous talk about contact point, I'm meeting that ball slightly in front of my feet to hit cross court, slightly working up the tennis ball with some good racket speed to get that really nice movement, you know, that more extreme angle. I want that racket, you know, really peeling up the back of the ball, creating an excessive amount of spin. Okay, so watch where the second bounce occurs from this angle right here. Okay, let's go one more there, Mark. See if I can pull it a little bit wider. There it is. Okay, so pretty good angle right there. Mark, I'm going to have you do me a favor. I want you to put that cone down where I just landed that last shot. A little farther to the left, I think. Yeah, right about there. Okay, so with all that topspin I just hit, I'm able to hit that spot, keep the ball in play. Just imagine we're trying to hit forehand angles without enough topspin. Take a look. I'm going to aim for that same target, and I'm going to work the ball just a little bit flatter. Yeah, I mean, it went just slightly over the top of the cone, little to the right, and it goes in the alley. You know, let's say I take off a little more court because I'm really in an angle mindset. Okay, so there it is right there. That ball is right over the top of the cone, way too flat, and now on that same line where I just made that shot, it's now outside the alley. So it's just so imperative to get a ton of topspin on angles. It is probably, I'll safely say this is the shot that has the most topspin in the game, is a really sharp cross-court angle. Okay, so contact is occurring very thin. Watch this contact in slow motion right now. What I mean by thin is the strings are really working vertically up the ball. A solidly struck shot like I just hit wide, the racket's working more into the tennis ball. Watch how thin I hit this. The strings are moving up the tennis ball here. Pretty good angle right there, I got to be honest. Okay, now that's creating all that jump on the ball, makes it drop. It's creating a vacuum underneath the tennis ball, just pulling it down. What I want to tie back into this is that idea of racket speed. All right, when we hit the ball thin, if we're slowing the racket down because it's kind of this small target, ooh, let me be kind of safe with this shot, no racket speed with thin contact, watch the result. There it is right there. I'm just kind of brushing the ball nice, getting it really thin, but being too safe with it. Not creating enough speed is a bad idea for hitting an angle. So let's tie it all in here. Cross-court angle, the most topspin we are getting in tennis. All right, really work under the ball, out and around the tennis ball, because as we know, contact is way in front of us. and combine it with all that racket head speed we talked about. And Mark, what I'm going to have you do is after this angle lands, I want you to put the cone down where the second bounce occurs, because that's a really good idea for all of you to be thinking, not just, ooh, let me dip it in there. Where's the opponent going to be? Okay, it's okay that these angles don't get hit for winners. It's not like the guy is always at the net and it's a passing shot. They might run this down, but let's look at where they're going to be hitting from so we can really visualize where to pre-plan the next shot after a great angle. Okay, here we go. Okay, Mark, that cone, I think it's right near that ball. Yeah, okay, look at that. Okay, all that topspin. Mark's super fast. Maybe he runs that down. But rather than get stuck thinking, oh, look at where I landed it, and I'm looking at that first cone, I want to know where he's going to be. And now open court's pretty obvious for my next shot. Maybe he scrambles out of there. Very common after a good angle to see the opponent run out of the corner. I might hit the exact same ball again and go behind him. Okay, so all of that idea is tied into how we hit this angle. It is based on topspin. You cannot execute this shot without an extreme amount of topspin. So work the outside of the ball, work really steep up the tennis ball, creating that thin contact, and pair it with that heavy, heavy racket speed, because otherwise you're not going to see that ball go over the net. Okay, should we hit angles from just inside the baseline from the center line? In my book, I don't see why this would be a shot we want to use. Let me just show you, okay? Kind of just inside the baseline, thinking about an angle, and number one, I think it's just really eye-opening. There's not a lot of room to my left from right here to hit an angle. The way when I get over here, I see so much more room across the court, okay? So visually, without seeing a ton of tennis court, I don't see how I'm going to hit this shot confidently, so that's a problem. Secondly, you know, again, it's not going to work off the court as much off the bounce the way it will from here. I can get the bounce of the ball wider from there than I can from here. And I'm going into Mark's forehand. So it's a small target. It's not exuding confidence out of me to hit it there because I have not a ton of angle. And Mark's forehand's going to chase this thing down and probably rip me for a winner. So let me just demonstrate an angle from the center here. Probably the best one I've ever hit, and I still am not a believer in that shot, okay? So what I will say is this. From the center of the court, or possibly a little into my backhand side, a shot that I think is really great to use would be more of a run-around forehand angle, okay? And I think the thought here generally is when we run around our forehand, we're trying to go a little bigger than our backhand can, right? A lot of us out there think that our backhand maybe is just steady, but not going to have as much pop as the forehand. So we're getting onto this side of the ball to hit a bigger shot. So we don't often think about using an angle with our runaround forehand, okay? So let's first watch just a runaround forehand, and I want to illustrate where the second bounce occurs when I'm ripping the ball into that half of the court, and then show the difference between that and an actual angle, okay? So Mark, little runaround forehand here. I'm going to drive it to the ad side. Let's put, you have a cone over there? Or maybe not. You could just go stand where the second bounce occurs if you don't mind. Okay, here we go. Okay, so it's into the back fence. Pretty good shot, I'll be honest, right there. Yeah, so there's where I just hit that ball, okay? Mark is dealing with an extremely heavy shot from me, but how far would I have moved him outside the middle of the court? 2 or 3 steps, maybe, okay? So where I think there's a lot of value when we're talking about angles is starting to work this runaround forehand where I'm trying to get the ball to bounce off that side of the court. And that, to me, the way we're going to decide if it's an angle or not is, does the ball bounce over the singles sideline before it crosses the baseline? That really kind of sets the tone for whether it's an angle. So let's have a look now. I'm going to make a ball bounce over the center, the singles line before it gets to the baseline. Okay, so that actually got outside the doubles alley, maybe a sharper angle than I'd actually normally go for. But Mark, if you could, just run over there to where that second bounce occurred. Okay, so now if I'm talking about a player that was in the middle of the court, gave me this ball to run around, and I think more in terms of an angle and I can get it to bounce over the doubles alley, that opponent is having to cover so much more ground. So where a lot of times the thought is, oh, just run around my backhand and crush forehands through the court, let's start to add a little variety to that run around forehand and hit a little more angle. So now let's talk about how to do that. I'm going to show you on this side. Okay, so we've discussed that the down the line forehand is late contact compared to a cross court angle. Let me show you down the line forehand contact here. Okay, so missed that by a little bit, but you guys get the idea that I'm hitting that ball later than I would to hit angle here. Now, a lot of times we're so in tune to think, oh, angle, I got to hit way in front of me. This shot's the exact opposite. This shot's contact point is actually later than my standard down the line contact point. Notice this is really how I want to be hitting this ball. It's just I'm on the wrong half of the court to do it. Okay, it's almost back in here. Okay, and from this side, the problem is I would miss it wide, right? But now transplant me over here. I've run around my backhand, and now later contact has the strings facing where? Right over to that spot, okay? So be very clear. If we trigger that idea of angle and we think, oh, I got to hit this early, obviously that ball is going to stay in the same half of the court that I'm standing in. So a couple things are going to remain the same though with our standard cross court angle. Open stance is a must. All right, I think it gets very awkward to come around this and step in here. It just, the step in really produces a contact point that's farther in front of me. So now if I were to try to hit that, I just feel like I'd almost be, you know, blocking this little angle. Yeah, maybe it's effective, but that's not how I want to be swinging my racket. So let's get open stance so that we're feeling that ability to really be athletic through the hit. And then obviously racket speed needs to be there because again, this shot is spinning. If I spin the ball a decent amount and I don't have racket speed, I think it's, you know, something we all know now, just doesn't go anywhere. Okay, so the contact point is what's changing for the runaround forehand angle. It's now a lot later than my cross court forehand angle. I'm letting it almost get slightly off my hip here. Keeping my racket speed up, opening up my stance like I normally would, and I'm trying to get this ball to release over the singles line before it crosses the baseline. Let's have a look again here. Okay, so why would we do this? All right, I think that's always a great question to ask ourselves is why are we going to maybe tack this shot onto our arsenal when maybe our standard runaround forehand is good enough? Okay, so let's look at the benefits of this shot and a couple things about position too. I think as we all know, most players are right-handed. So number one, I'm hitting into their backhand. But like we talked about, if I just hit it kind of cross court but through the court, a lot of people's backhands where they only have to move a step or two, they're going to be more confident. You get people kind of doubting their abilities the farther they have to run. Okay, so obviously with the angle making them run a little more, I'm going into their weakness and tacking on some footwork to it. To me, that's a huge bonus. Okay, now, you know, position wise, I think as we know, if I get a step or two outside the middle, yes, there's an angle there, but it's not going to be maybe as significant of an angle as if I were to get maybe a step or two wider. So I think what I would probably like to have you guys follow is this idea that, to keep the variety idea alive, when you're hitting run around forehands, maybe just a step or two outside middle. Mark, go ahead and feed me one. This is probably the time to still drill it straight through, because it really doesn't give us that clean view of the ball bouncing off the court, because I'm still relatively near the middle of the court. What I'm generally looking for is this floatier ball, little slower, allows me time, and it's a little wider. Okay, I want to see myself more in this position out here. Now I feel like I can just hit this angle without trying to like manufacture it too much. The other cool thing is this. I feel like when I throw that shot in, that angle runaround from this position, what's the other great shot I could hit? Mark, send me up one of those one more time, please. I for sure got that down the line ball still there, which from a little wider position, again, it's a lot clearer shot. I see that line straight ahead of me. So I've got this ability, the wider I go, to really work the extent of the court, where when I'm closer to the center, I'm just not seeing my ball release off the side of the court in my head the way I can from the outsides, okay? So, run around forehand, closer to the middle of the court. I think still drill it, just cross court. The ball will cross the baseline before it crosses the sideline, if it ever gets to the sideline. And then as we're getting a few steps outside the middle more, later contact point than even our down the line standard forehand. Keep that stance open so you're staying athletic. Keep the racket speed up, because as we know, angles, it's just imperative to have spin to get that ball to really jump off the court. And you guys are on your way again to, you know, having a few more tools in the arsenal so that the variety you're playing with is really keeping the opponent on their toes. But let's look at the backhand angle. There are definitely some similarities to the forehand angle and definitely some differences, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just hit a couple to begin with, and let's see if we can just kind of figure out what's going on similar and what's different. Okay, so stance. First thing we talked about with the forehand angle was open stance is so key. Obviously there you're seeing more of that step in or neutral stance from me, simply because on the backhand side with my dominant arm leading, to get me on the outside of that ball to be able to create that angle, I feel like it's easier with that leading leg going into the ball. A lot of times open stance on the backhand, when you see it played by the pros, they're actually doing it to save themselves some time, and contact generally is a little bit later on their open stance backhand. So if they pull off an angle, it's because they're so good with their hands and they maybe just flick it cross court. But I'm really kind of feeling like for all of us out there, that step in to the backhand will allow for better reach to the outside of the ball, okay? That brings us into contact point, okay? Contact point needs to be really far out in front of us, because as we know, we want the strings at contact facing our target, okay? So back in here next to my body, the strings are facing forward. That would be a down the line ball. A little farther out in front of that, more to the middle, and farther out in front. is my angle. So we've got to be feeling that outside part of the ball occurring in front of us, because if we play that idea back here, I think you guys will feel some wrist pain. I obviously have the one-hander. Some of you out there might be trying to create that left-handed snap to hit angles if contact's not early enough. So really reinforce that early strike. Farther in front of the body, the better. It creates that nice, sharp cross-court ball. And then third would be, again, this is so key, racket speed. We know that target is small. All right, I've said this on the forehand. It's a small target. And we don't want that to paralyze us and make us fear hitting to that spot. You know, there's especially on the backhand, really common thing that happens is, okay, I want to hit angle, but we're afraid of it. And so we just kind of steer the ball there with no racket speed, almost decelerating the racket. So keep the racket speed up because we want all that spin. And with that spin, we know that contact is occurring. My word is thin. Contact's occurring thin because I'm working up the ball, not into the ball. And if I don't speed the racket up, all that spin's just going to drop straight down into the net. So I want to really accelerate out, get that contact point in front of me. You know, and again, I'm probably, when I practice that, okay missing a little wide sometimes. That lets me know I probably hit it big enough, hit it with enough spin, hit it early enough, and maybe just chewed off a little too much court. I can always play around with my target a little bit. But those three things are really key, is that step-in stance, you know, contact point really early, and racket speed. For some of you more advanced players out there, there's a little fourth addition that you might want to add, especially for the one-hander. I've talked to Mark about this. He'll do it with his two-hander. It's this idea of really creating that vertical flick at the end of the swing. For me, it occurs with the right hand. Obviously, it's a low to high stroke to get that thin contact, but that's created, you know, at the start of the swing to add some ability to get more topspin. You can notice that flick. Mark does it with the two-hander like this. The left hand's very involved. For me, it's that move right there. And if I just show you that right now, I'm not going to try to make this ball, but you're going to see how much extra spin gets created with that right there, okay? So that flick, if you feel like you're capable of maneuvering the racket fast and up with the wrist while still maintaining control of the racket, that's an addition to be made to really get that advanced angle that can jump off the court, okay? So backhand angle, as important as the forehand. I just think that, you know, we got to play around with the stance a little bit and possibly that flick. Otherwise, a lot of similarities between the forehand and backhand angle.